All right. So, episode 2, Pride and Prejudice. This is just volume 2 of the book. We did volume 1 last time, and then a couple weeks from now, we will record the ending, volume 3.
Yes.
And wrap this one up before we move on to the next thing. Just before I hit record, you were saying that you really liked this reading. So I have some things. I took some notes. But
is that a chart you made?
I got this off the computer. Somebody else
Okay.
did this, and I'm just using it as a cheat sheet.
Yeah.
Especially in this area, I get kind of confused from time to time.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to kind of follow along.
And I mean, I guess that's actually a good.
Who.
It's actually a good place to start. I think there's a certain type of reader, both of which we are, and I would imagine anybody that bothers to watch your videos probably are among that type of reader as well, who actually feels a little bit gratified when part of the structure of the book is there's a little bit of a galaxy of characters, and you feel like, okay, I'm figuring out who's who, and you feel like you're absorbed in the world. It's a world build.
Right. There's a network.
There's a network, and this book has more going on. I think you talked about this last time than Sense and Sensibility did in terms of who all the players are. More names to remember, including the sisters' names, for that matter.
Right. Which
yeah.
really kind of became a little bit bigger part of the story right at the end of today's reading.
Yeah, the Kitty and Lydia become big. Mary, a little bit, like trying to figure out what's going on with her.
Right.
But I enjoyed the. There's a lot of things I enjoyed about Volume 2. I think. Okay, I'll start with something simple. We talked about how, on the one hand, Elizabeth Bennet's father is extremely lovable. And on the other hand, though, he's maybe indulging himself a little more than he has a right to, giving what's at stake for the girls.
Right.
And I found this really good example of it on page 159. This relates to what you were saying. Like, we find out that Lydia and Kitty are like more than boy crazy. It seems to be a legitimate fear on Elizabeth's part that one of them's going to do something scandalous if this Forster person is left in charge. Like Lydia's on the verge of making herself maybe not just ridiculous, but maybe even sleeping with somebody at the age of 15. I couldn't tell, but Liz is, all I'm saying is Liz is worried about something that, to an extent, is to her credit, and to an extent I have problems with, right? And then and Mr. Bennet's argument is, let her go. It's a peace in the house. And then he says this thing on 159. Elizabeth goes, "If you were aware of the very great disadvantage to us all, which must arise from the public notice of Lydia's unguarded and imprudent manner, nay, what has already arisen from it, I'm sure you would judge differently in the affair." And here, of course, she's talking about Darcy busting up Bingley and Jane because the other women in the house are uncouth.
Right.
And Bennet's answer, I thought about this a lot ever since I read it. "Already arisen," repeated Mr. Bennet. "What, has she frightened away some of your lovers? Poor little Lizzie, please do not be cast down." It's this next sentence. "Such squeamish youths as cannot bear to be connected with a little absurdity are not worth a regret." And so I wrote in the margins of that, that's true. That's true, that if you love a woman, what Bennett is saying there is, if you love a woman and it's like, oh, she has an embarrassing sister, why I never, then that makes you the asshole. He's absolutely right. And this is part of what makes Darcy kind of an asshole. On the other hand, he has a responsibility to play a little bit of ball. Like, maybe being right isn't the only thing on the table here. And so I'm really conflicted about Bennett, and I think this is to Austen's credit, that she can give you a line that makes so much sense and then also is like kind of selfish for him to say. So what do you think about that?
I will say it's going to take me a second to find the thing that I want to connect to that.
Yeah.
That comes quite a bit earlier in today's reading. But I will say, I think that not to try to like make this about being a particularly kind of woke, but I will say I think Mr. Bennet can say this because in part he's Mr. Bennett. You know, he is coming from the perspective of somebody who's made the decision not to be bothered by his wife's uncouthness, who married her regardless, because she was pretty. And there's even a mention.
Yeah, at the end, it's like he regretted it even.
You know, and so he's in a position to kind of say, well, if that's not good enough for them, then they can go pound sand. But one of the things that is really definitive for me about Elizabeth Bennet, one of the things, and I'll say, some of what you're saying about Mr. Bennet, I feel similarly about Elizabeth Bennet. I feel like she sometimes is sort of like right but not right in these ways.
A lot of times.
And it kind of comes out. I'll swing back to that. I don't want to mix my stuff up too much, but there's this moment. It starts on 105, and it has to do with people being mad, I believe, at Wickham paying attention
to Mrs. King,
yes,
Miss King.
Yes, because her grandfather has died, and now she's suddenly worth £10,000 or some nonsense. And Mrs. Gardner, right, her aunt, the one that she ends up spending some time with in London, is very upset about this, right? Thinks that this is, you know, very bad behavior, right? And the sisters, Kitty and Lydia, very upset about this, right? Because he's one of their officers, or whatever he is. I guess he's not an officer, is he?
Yeah, he's it was like his last resort. He went to the military. Yeah.
And so Lizzie sort of kind of, you know, Lizzie says, where is it? But my feelings are not only, this is right towards the end of 105, my feelings are not only cordial toward him, they are even impartial toward Miss King. I cannot find out that I hate her at all, or that I am in the least unwilling to think her a very good sort of girl. There can be no love in all of this.
Yeah.
Right? And then jump down to the very end. Importance may sometimes be purchased too dearly. Kitty and Lydia take this defection, right, that his attention shifting to King, take this defection much more to heart than I do. They are young in the ways of the world and not yet open to the mortifying conviction that handsome young men must have something to live on as well as the plain. And so on the one hand, Elizabeth is, I mean, much more so than anybody in Sense and Sensibility, she is aware of the game they are playing and frank about it.
Yeah.
You know, she's like, well, this is what, she's talking to Colonel Fitzwilliam.
Yeah.
When they're at Collins's house.
Yeah.
You know, and he's like, oh, woe is me, it's the second son, I don't get to marry who I want. She's like, unless you want to marry somebody with a fortune, which I notice a lot of you do.
Yes, yes, yes.
And so she's very dialed in and very aware of this game.
Yeah.
At the same time that she finds herself, or wants to find herself, superior to it.
Well, that plus, and this goes into how she is so much like her father in that she's both right and wrong, except for in a way, the impudence of age maybe. Less cool than her dad, right. Because like even in the paragraph above what you read on 105, the narrator, who is much less intrusive in this book than she was, but the narrator even says Elizabeth, less clear-sighted perhaps in his case than in Charlotte's, did not quarrel with him for his wish of independence. And so, you know, that quote you just read about how men have to have something to live on, well, so do women. And you know, she was so judgmental of Charlotte, but now, because she likes Wickham, what Elizabeth is saying here is, my principles are less important than if I like you. Like, since I like Wickham right now, I'm just going to say, well, men got to eat. After Darcy's letter, same subject comes up. Now, and the narrator even says, now she sees the engagement with King in a less flattering light. Now she sees it as mercenary and just grasping at straws. And I'm like, well, that's no way to, you know, to live. Like, you know, kid, you're gonna have to like figure out where you stand at some point. You know,
I will defend her here. I think that there is a principle at work here. I think she's not being as inconsistent as you suggest.
Okay.
And the principle is, if these men are otherwise following the rules,
Yeah.
then they're allowed to try to marry women with fortunes.
Yeah.
The problem, what changes, right, in between those two instances, is that she discovers that Wickham had a good situation and he blew it because of poor character, and that he's a liar.
And that he tried to scandalize Darcy's
Right.
baby sister.
Right. And so all of that, this is no longer just a guy playing the game, right? This is a guy who's just like left the table but is still somehow reaching for the money. And
That's true. I mean, it becomes about ethos in this way that is always confusing to me, because there is this part of me that wants to say, in life and even in our own political moment, right? Am I holding this person to the same standard that I'm holding this other person to, or am I out of animosity? Cheering, whatever, these indictments, or this political loss, or this thing, that if the shoe were on the other foot, I would be, I can never tell how much of this is driven by personal sensibility, to go back to the first novel, how much of it is driven by real conviction. And plus, I would add, Lizzie's pretty young, but I think your point really tempered.
21, right?
20 or 21,
yeah,
I can't remember. But your point definitely tempers mine, that, it can be that Lizzie thinks that while distasteful, the game is the game. But what you can't do is both play the game and sully other people's character and your own. Let's be honest, he's also going around staining Darcy's name.
Right.
He's doing a lot of things that make it hard to say, okay, fine, you had a right to go after Miss King.
Well, let's not forget, kind of reaching back to last week's reading, and I guess reaching forward to the end, or really not quite the end, but the what I think of as the real high moment, the proposal with Darcy, and the aftermath of that.
Yeah.
A lot of this comes back to that ball that Bingley threw, where Collins and Mrs. Bennet just behave. They're not bad people,
Right.
but they behave badly.
They did.
And it's embarrassing, and Lizzie is embarrassed. Like, she, in that moment, I think I even read in the last episode, I think I read the thing that she thought was like they couldn't have revealed more of their lack of sophistication if they had tried.
Well, even in today's reading, the way Kitty and Lydia go on about these soldiers, Elizabeth is like, she's mad, but she thinks to herself, well, no wonder Darcy, broke it off with Bingley and Jane. And so this comes all the way back to Mr. Bennet's comment. It's like, yes, you're right. Like, Darcy probably did fundamentally fuck up Bingley's happiness, and Bingley probably is a fool for, they're both probably fools for judging Jane by these people. On the other hand, in real life, things happen, and, it can be embarrassing sometimes, and, like you said, Mr. Bennet is privileged. He's in his August middle age. He's already all set up. He's surrounded by,
He doesn't go to London.
No.
He doesn't do business with these people.
Yeah.
My sense is that, the real value of the society, and this is not my area.
Yeah.
This is essentially like what I learned from watching Downton Abbey.
Right.
My sense is that these connections are important because these people do business with each other to keep their wealth contained within their society so that nobody gets hurt too bad, right? There's this gentleman's agreements, that they're making deals that help each other, and the way this works is you abide by a certain, and trust me, I know there are all kinds of hypocritical stuff built into this, but within their framework, you abide by this certain sort of rule of decorum that is very gendered, is very classed, all that, and that's how you stay afloat in this world. Now, we mentioned this last time. You could just opt out. You could just go be a lawyer in town.
Like Gardner's husband.
Seems to work really well.
Yeah.
But if you want to be in this world, and I think this is what I feel like Bennett, that Elizabeth understands that Mr. Bennett doesn't. If you want to be in this world, this is the price of admission. If you want to do this other thing, then you just can't be in this world.
And the irony of Mrs. Bennett is that she desperately wants to be in the world, but she's not willing to adapt her behavior.
Not capable. Like she's just not.
Well, that's sadder if she's not capable.
She's just
but
not sophisticated enough to understand.
Yeah.
I mean, and this is a type, right? I mean, this goes all the way back to like Dryden. And Pope. You know, this is a type. What's her name? Mrs. Malaprop, right? This is the kind of jump. I mean, even Lady Catherine to some extent. The only reason she gets away with it, I mean, she doesn't follow the rules. She's just so rich. It's sort of like what we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
She just does what she does, and people let her do it.
Yeah.
And
what are you thinking of in specific where Lady Catherine breaks decorum? I don't know if I noticed that.
Oh man, she's the thing that really so Mrs. Bennett's grave fault, right, is to like let is it Lydia or Kitty who's singing?
Lets Kitty keep singing, I think.
And not only that, but encourages, and along with Collins, encourages her, even though she's not that good and it's sort of embarrassing.
Yeah.
And they should be saving her. They should know that these big city types are not going to be impressed with her rustic singing.
Yeah.
But then I thought that there was this definite echo on 121, Lady Catherine, and this is a bit of a tangent, but I can't resist. I did a job interview, a disastrous job interview, 18, 19 years ago, just before I defended my dissertation and all that, where I flew out and it was 2 full days of an on-campus. I mean, like 12 hours each day.
Yeah.
It was grueling, and there were like, somehow they squeezed in like 6 events where you're like standing around a cheese table while people talk to you in these different places, and I'll never forget, just already half beat to death. It was like midway through the 2nd day, and it had started snowing, and nobody had thought it was going to snow, and I wasn't really prepared for that. And there was like, the next thing on the agenda was like a tour of the campus, and I was like, now I'm going to have to like borrow somebody's coat while I'm here interviewing for you. Like, I don't have my own coat, sir. And this kind of stuff. And I'm just sitting there just trying to get some cheese in me. Basically. And this dude who has never introduced himself, I don't have any idea who he is. He might be the president of the college, he might be the biggest donor, I have no idea. He might be the janitor, I don't know. Just walks up to me and goes, "So what instrument do you play?" And at the time, I played no instruments. And I was just kind of like, I don't know, I'll just go home, man. I'll just go home. Like, if this is where we're starting, I'm not the right guy. But on 121, Lady Catherine is just grilling Elizabeth, right? And how many of your sisters play instruments? How many of you sing? Do you draw? Oh, you don't have math. You never had a governess. And she's
that's a lot like Mrs. Bennett,
right? And even more so, right at the bottom of 120 and then over to 121, they're talking about music. Fitzwilliam, who's so much like the better person in the scene, is talking to Elizabeth about what music they're listening to and that kind of thing, and then Lady Catherine does that thing every 20 minutes where she yells across the room, "What are you talking about? I want to be part of it." Totally uncouth.
That does call back to what the Bennett women were doing.
And then even more so, right, when she says it's about music, Lady Catherine says, this is the second to last sentence on 120, "There are few people in England, I suppose, who have more true enjoyment of music than myself, or a better natural taste."
Right. Yeah, I drew a laughing emoji at that.
Yeah. "If I had ever learnt, I should have been a great proficient."
Yeah.
If I could have gotten around to learn anything, I would have been a virtuoso.
Right.
And this is incredibly trashy. This is what this reminds me of.
Well, it says on 121, I just realized, I wrote, "Oh my God," next to this, "Mr. Darcy looked a little ashamed of his aunt's ill breeding and made no answer."
Right.
So that is a great catch. I'm glad that you've brought this up.
And, I'm reminded, right, kind of thinking about my area a little bit.
Yeah.
One of the things in this kind of 19th century Southern stuff, especially the very early stuff, was this kind of uncouthness of the sort of like Western frontiers person.
Yeah.
And there's this great A.B. Longstreet story called The Fight. No, it's Georgia Theatrics is what it's called. Where this guy thinks that he's about to, he like hears this fight happening, sort of through the next clearing in the woods, and he thinks he's about to walk in on just this massacre. I mean, this guy's like, oh, how about I gouge out your other eye, and all this stuff, and this guy walks out, and there's just this one kid.
Yeah.
And the ground's all beaten flat, and the narrator's like, what's going on? Were you just fighting? He says, no, I was just thinking how I would have fought. And the idea is this kid's like play acting, all of this horrible violence, and somehow this is humorous. And this, I would have been a great proficient. I mean, talk about.
And she can get away with it because she's absolutely loaded.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she's surrounded, and she has this talent, like other people that I won't bother naming, but she has this talent for surrounding herself with bootlickers like Collins. Right, who I found incredibly distasteful.
Oh yeah, obsequious as hell.
Yeah.
It was on purpose, right? Like the narrator goes out of her way to talk about how, even Lady Catherine is a little disgusted, right, at the way that Collins and who's the other guy, the father, Mr. Gardner,
his
or
father-in-law.
It's Mr. Lucas.
Yeah.
Like every dish, you're like, oh my God, it's the best thing I ever had. And it's just like hard to take.
Right, and these dishes, and these, it's just, And so I think one of the things, and I'm kind of talking to myself and feel,
no wonder Darcy's such a dick. Like,
right?
and he likes Bingley and he likes the Fitzwilliam.
Right.
He seems to be this dude that's like, well, I'm just going to hang out with my friends and I'm going to try to not let any women gold dig them. And that's just what I'm going to do. And, it doesn't make him the worst guy to have, given the world that he's in.
Well, I suspect, because it's hard to like him.
It is. Hard. I mean, Elizabeth is all tore up at this point. At this point in the reading, she's like starting to entertain feelings for him, but she's very mad at herself for doing that.
Right.
Which haven't we all been there?
The same way, by the way, he narrates to her. He's mad at himself for proposing to her.
That's right.
And she's like, "How dare you?" And then, like 20 pages later, she's like, "That twerp, I kind of like him."
Right.
And so I feel like part of what's happening here, right, is that I mean, this is incisive as hell. This is Jane Austen just lighting a fire, saying like, this world we live in, like, it is baroque and unfair, and we act like there are rules, but they're more like what's the Pirates of the Caribbean?
They're more like suggestions.
They're more like suggestions.
Yeah.
And it really just depends on how much money you have.
It does.
And
it does in this book.
At the same time, Elizabeth Bennet is invested in this world. She has internalized a lot of these sort of expectations and a lot of these values. She wants people to be couth.
Not so much though.
No,
she's willing to. It's interesting. I agree with you, but what do you make? What's Austen doing with characterization by having Elizabeth turn him down? Like, you get this sense that even if a woman found him disgusting, if she were invested in the game, this is exactly who you marry. And she's like, not only will I not do it, but it would be the worst. You're the last man on earth I would ever marry, she says.
I'm really glad you asked that, because this is what I think is the key. This is the axis on which I think this whole book spins.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure. I came in here today thinking I was going to tell you that I liked Sense and Sensibility better.
Yeah.
I'm not so convinced right this second.
Yeah.
I think maybe you're talking me into like appreciating things about this that I wasn't fully appreciating. But I think the crux of this thing is that Elizabeth Bennet is kind of a bad person. She understands this world. She has internalized its values. She sees her mother as uncouth. She doesn't see her mother as like somebody Darcy sees as uncouth.
Yeah.
She sees her as uncouth.
Yeah.
Like no filter, just her.
Yeah.
Yet she also thinks of herself as better than this world, and that's how she turns down Darcy.
Yeah.
She's like, "Why, you're playing the game that I said we had to play." And
Right.
that's bad.
Right.
You know, and so there's this hypocrisy that I think is a necessary element of her sense of self-superiority. She thinks that she's better
Yeah.
than everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting how in Sense and Sensibility, if you compare the two primary Dashwood sisters to the two primary Bennett sisters, what you get is just interesting combinations. I mean, Lizzie as the younger one, there are moments where it feels like she's got Eleanor's sense, but she really does not.
Mm-hmm.
There's certainly moments where it feels like Jane has more virtue in the same way that Eleanor had.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, you know, I was kind of floored by when Darcy's letter, because even though I've read this book, it was a long time ago.
Sure.
I was kind of floored by his argument, like, because I get, like, in some ways this novel, just like Sense and Sensibility, the real love story is the sisters. And I dig that a lot.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
love
yeah.
the fact that the sisters are like, they're always defending each other, right or wrong. You know,
Yeah, yeah.
I can get on board with that. Even though this one's colored a little bit by disgust with other family members that is, you know, that might be
No,
uncouth.
but it's Lizzie and Jane.
It's Lizzie
I mean,
and
it's-
Jane.
like, which would be a great band name.
Yeah,
by the
yeah.
way.
But Darcy's argument, you know, he's like, listen, it just didn't seem to me like she was that into him. And I thought to myself, is that true? And as I started thinking about it, I was like, you know, Jane really has been characterized as kind of blasé and not passionate. And maybe Darcy had a right to think that maybe Jane was going to marry him for his money and that she didn't really love him, because Jane's not an affectionate woman.
And what an interesting reversal here.
Yeah.
That Darcy,
Yeah.
this affectless, silent lunk,
Yeah.
pulls his friend Bingley aside and goes, "I don't think she loves you, man. You should hold out for love."
Yes. And then he himself succumbs to love.
Right.
So in a way,
Yeah.
Darcy, for all his flaws, and I don't think either of us are saying he's not flawed, but he's maybe the most romantic character in the novel. I mean, in the sense of like
overcome by his own inability to
yeah, like almost in a William Blake sense, like a real respect for
I'm thinking-
reason and rules, but also a belief that in the end, if the energy is high enough, you can break through. Like that's what Blake always
I'm
thought,
thinking
you know.
that spontaneous Wordsworth thing, the spontaneous
Overflow of powerful feelings.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. That
All of whom influenced Austen.
Right,
So
right.
yeah.
So I'm with you, and I think what you're saying, or what I'm hearing at least, in what you're saying, that is making me rethink some of my thoughts about this is the degree to which, in some ways, this is a story of people who just grew up in a kind of terrible world,
Yeah.
and they're doing the best they can.
Yes.
You know, and some of them are doing quite well,
Yeah.
considering the circumstances, but they're all going to be kind of a wreck and occasionally be awful, and that's just, I think, where we are. But I think while we're on the topic, I think we have to talk about the specifics of this proposal.
Yeah, the proposal was dope. I mean, it's famous, first of all.
Yeah,
Like, everybody
yeah.
knows some of these lines, right? What page
Right.
does it start on?
131.
Yeah, his opening line.
In vain have I struggled.
I wrote, well, the whole speech, let's just say, in vain have I struggled, it will not do. My feelings will not be repressed. You must allow me to tell you how ardently I admire and love you. I want to say that in 2023, that line would be about as effective as it was then. This is part of why women swoon over Darcy. Like, that's the magic. Like we were joking earlier about, there's no magic words. Sometimes you just have to do the work.
Right.
But these kind
These
of
are magic
these are
words.
panty-dropping words.
Right.
And I just
It
love
will
it.
not do.
It will not do. Like, I just can't stand it. Like,
Yeah.
it's awesome. And she is floored.
Right.
She's floored. I mean, you know, it's hard for her to turn him down, partly because until, you know, she feels her sister has been insulted. But
And listen to the difference, though, right? I mean, this is his whole thing,
yeah.
right? I mean, like, this is a tight 3-sentence proposal.
Yeah.
Right? And then her response, first full paragraph of 132, in such cases as this, it is, I believe. the established mode to express a sense of obligation for the sentiments avowed, however unequally they may be returned. I mean, that's one sentence.
Yeah.
Right? So she's like, E equals MC squared.
Yeah.
Right? He's like, well, here's my heart.
Yes.
And she's like,
yeah.
And
here comes a speech. Yeah.
And there's this kind of interesting kind of reversal, and part of what's happening here, right, is that she just genuinely has no feelings for him yet. He is truly, madly, deeply, right? Like he's hurt by this love.
Yes.
I mean, this is like classic, like wind, at the cliffside, love, and I don't like this guy, by the way. Like, I'm not trying to pretend like he's a good guy, but you can't help but see the
it's real.
Yeah.
It's the real deal.
Right. And she, and I'm sure your wife has shown you this face, just like mine has shown me. She's like,
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like you feel a thing, do you?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
You feel that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and there's this sort of like Morpheus talking to Neo.
Yeah.
Kinda like,
you think that's air you're breathing?
Wow.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
And so when she comes back at him, right? I sort of feel like we're back in the previous novel, because he's like all sensibility, and she's like, but wait.
Yeah.
Let's logic on this for a minute.
Yeah.
And the logic is cruel.
Yeah, and she's wrong with some of it.
Right? I mean, the facts are just wrong.
Yeah.
But it's really interesting to me, right?
Yeah.
That this is not quite halfway. This is probably 2/3 of the way, but I feel like this is halfway into the soul of the book.
It is.
Like this is the teeter-totter sort of fulcrum.
Well, we talked last time. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, and I was just gonna say that it clearly marks this as like, this is the main sort of drama of the novel. Like, does she or doesn't she? Right? But it also makes it clear that a big part of what this is about is kind of her own sort of journey to discover herself.
Elizabeth's, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. Which, again, we forget how young these people are.
She's going to do that before she can understand.
And certainly should do it before she marries a man.
Right.
I mean, it is stripping aside all, going back to the Mr. Bennett way of looking at the world for a minute. Like, it is kind of stupid what Charlotte did, even though it was also smart.
Yeah.
Like unless Charlotte did it truly with eyes open, which I guess she did. But I remember a couple weeks ago suggesting to you that, you were like, well, I still don't like Darcy. And now you're saying, well, you still don't like him, but you also kind of see the romantic in him. But I feel that this was Austen's way, and I suggested this last time, of setting us up to allow ourselves to like him. The fact that because we know how this ends, we know. We're not pretending that we don't. So here's a man who gave her his heart. She stomps on it. A man of means like this, and if he was so prideful, would walk away in a huff and never speak to her again and go find some pretty girl to kiss his butt.
Right.
The fact that he allows her to be this wrong and this cruel and give her the letter, and we already know in advance that he's going to come back and ask again.
Right.
That's pretty badass. I think this opens the door to liking him. This shows that he's willing to be humbled and
maybe
that kind of stuff.
Maybe. What I'm going to say is, I think it's possible to be a person who's madly in love with somebody.
Yeah.
Who makes themselves vulnerable to this person, who is genuinely crushed.
Yeah.
Just from a sideways look for this person.
Yeah.
And also still be a bad guy.
Oh, of course, yeah, of course.
And so I don't think I'm going to find myself in the business of trying to reconcile these two things.
Okay.
In fact, what I think is happening, my read, if I were writing it, if this were our graduate seminar and we were going to have to write papers at the end of the semester, I think one of the real kind of strong ideas I might run with is the idea that this doesn't redeem Darcy as much as it brings down Elizabeth Bennet off her pedestal of superiority enough to realize that she deserves Darcy.
Okay.
In that sense. But I take your point all the same. Like he does this thing,
Well, it's the antithesis of pride. I guess is what I agree with you that you could still be a dick in your business dealings and everything else, but I think we're being set up to see, just like with Wickham, that he actually has pretty good character also. But I think, if he's the apotheosis of pride, and I'm starting to think maybe he and Elizabeth both are Pride and Prejudice.
Maybe.
But if he in some ways is the apotheosis of pride, the way some of them have been describing him, including Wickham, this is the opposite of pride. Violently in love. I mean, I don't know if there is a force that can help a person get over their pride. I mean, maybe this is the hippie in me. But I don't know if there's a force that can help somebody get through the treacherous waters of pride any better than being deeply in love can. Maybe. I mean, I don't know. We still have a whole volume to read.
I take your point, and I think it makes a lot of sense. I think what I want to advocate for is a position that kind of says, like, he can get around that pride in this one, 5-minute section of his day.
Yeah.
Right, but that doesn't change the way that he behaved. It doesn't mean he's going to be like, anything other than surly and silent to people who he thinks are his inferiors.
Right.
For the rest of his life. I mean, she could have said yes right that second, and then he would just go on being that guy who like sits silently in the drawing room,
makes everybody uncomfortable and nervous,
while these young ladies are trying every trick they know just to get him to say hi.
Yeah.
Just to recognize them. So I think we're saying the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just saying like his behavior is not necessarily, there are going to be elements of his character that evince this pride. I think regardless. Like
yes.
I think if there were a Pride and Prejudice Part 2 and they were in their 50s, he'd still be that. I mean, like.
Probably.
Like the young men in town would be like, "Oh man, Mr. Darcy, he's tough."
Yeah.
I don't know. There'd be none of that like jovial Mr. Bennett business.
No, probably not.
No, like, well, just let Lizzie get it, or let Lydia get it out of her system, kind of business.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I also think like this proposal it's really interesting to me. People bandy around the words toxic masculinity in a lot of ways that I think don't work today.
Mm-hmm.
But I also find myself thinking, like, basically telling a woman, like I've tried and I just can't see a way around it. I'm going to have to propose to you. That feels a bit like toxic masculinity.
Yeah.
I
was praising it before, but it is also an aggressive. There's an aggression. It's like both sweet and not. Again, like I think one of the things we're seeing is like some people are right and not at the same time. Yeah. This proposal is like cash money hot and also disturbing all at once.
Well, it's like you've messed things up.
Yeah.
And now I guess I just have to do something about it.
You ruined it. You made me love you.
Right.
I was rolling.
Right. And so to be fair, like to circle back to what you're saying.
Yeah.
I think there are certain cultural models, very much held to by people on the full spectrum of gender identity.
Yeah.
Who understand that to be super hot.
Absolutely, he's much loved by many.
So I have this hitch in me where I can't help but see him as a bit of an abuser or something.
Yeah.
Along those lines.
Yeah.
And I'm sure the state of Indiana will pass a law against me for this or whatever.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I also want to recognize that whatever my like delicate sensibilities might be, this is very much in the mode. I'll say this is very much in the mode of the thing that I think we all find a little troubling now, from those 1970s movies where like the big strong man just pushes the woman down into the hay pile.
Yeah.
And like they get married at the end. But
sometimes she kisses him back. Like it's very
Yeah. But those scenes make me very uncomfortable now.
They do, yeah.
I also recognize that at the time, and maybe still now, right? And maybe more than I think. Maybe people don't say it out loud, but I think maybe there's a little Paris Hilton voice in a lot of heads going, "That's hot."
Well, I'm reminded of that scene in E.T. when they're operating on the frogs and Elliot lets all the frogs out, and the blonde girl. is about to walk out of the room. Meanwhile, E.T. is watching one of these old movies where a woman tries to walk away. And the hero, it might even be Humphrey. Right. I don't know who it is. He snatches her back. And my mom always used to say, by the way, even back in the 70s, she hated those scenes. She was like, if I'm trying to walk away, by the way, like I'm leaving the room, like I'm not going to kiss you back. But and that kind of stuck with me. But E.T. is so moved by this. And it's interesting that he's not even human.
Right.
He's learning this is how men and women are.
Right.
Which I think Spielberg, on some level, even then knew was fucked up.
Right.
But Elliot does it. He grabs the 12-year-old girl. He has her, either she's taller than him, I think she's taller than him, so he steps on another guy who happens to be laying on the ground. Right. And kisses her, and this big romantic music plays.
Smells, yeah.
And, there's a part of me that thinks, boy, he wouldn't be able to make that scene today.
Yeah, it's like a minimum 3-day suspension.
And on Twitter. And what you're saying, what I'm hearing you say anyway, is some version of, and you know what? While something of a cultural loss, that's also probably good. That you can't unironically make that scene today without people going, hey, wait, she was leaving. Remember, she was leaving the room. You grabbed her.
Yeah.
So I feel you on all this.
Yeah, I guess what I'm trying to say, just to be clear, I don't know that I feel like it's a cultural loss.
Yeah.
I think that maybe in a way that is unique to desire.
Yeah.
We sometimes like things that we can't stand behind.
Yeah.
In whatever other way.
Yeah.
Right. That something might get your motor revving. That if you had to vote for it, you would not vote for it.
Right.
And I recognize that. I'm not trying to judge that.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's just how it is.
Part of human nature.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that the media we consume probably has a lot to do with that, and we get kind of used to certain modes of expressing that kind of thing, and these things are entangled with power and with money and with class and race and all that stuff. And I feel like, the same way Mr. Bennett is able to be like, well, then they just shouldn't care, right? This is the same way, this is very similar to Darcy, feeling like it's a legitimate proposal. I mean, think of what he could have said here.
Right.
Think of the things he could have recanted. Think of I have been very terrible at expressing my feelings towards you, and it's the frustration that I'm feeling in my inability to properly address the strength of my feelings. There are all these things that but instead it's like the evidence of his love is that he loves her even though she's not worth it.
Right.
And there's a bit of just a pimp slap there.
It is.
And she's supposed to be like, oh, he cares.
Yeah, she's supposed to swoon, and I think part of why people treat her as a heroine is that she has the strength to turn him down, even though he's Big Jim in the story. Yeah. But I know we're about running out of time, but I want to sound you out on something that's very much related. So if you have more to say about this, I think this will probably be a good segue for it. I think another reason that people, I think women, just based on my experience with Austin, but I think you're right, people across the spectrum love the Elizabeth and Darcy arc. Part of it is the fraught nature of that proposal and everything you just said. That it's both hot. Sometimes things are hottest when you think they're hot and you wouldn't vote for them. Let's be honest. Well, this is what fetishes are, really.
There's that danger. There's that walking close to the edge.
Yeah.
Sure.
My other question is, I think related to this, it seems like a conceit in all the, and as you know, I'm a big sitcom guy. I watched a lot of sitcoms growing up. I still love the genre. It's a conceit that goes before Austin. You could think about, the big one on my mind right now is Much Ado About Nothing. That people seem to love in their romantic comedies a model where the people start off not liking each other.
Moonlighting.
We could name example after example. Yeah. You're absolutely right, moonlighting. And yet they grow to love each other, and it's almost like they think it would be awesome to have this story for the grandkids. Well, I couldn't stand him when I first met him. Austen's participating in that, obviously, and in a way making it modern, right? Modernizing this sort of Shakespeare or whatever.
Right.
Is that toxic? Are people wrong to romanticize that idea as much as we do? Or is there something to it, do you think, that might actually be healthy?
Man, so as one old married dude to another old married dude, I feel like I'm not an old enough married dude to really answer that question.
Yeah.
I think what I want to say is, as a provisional answer, and I think this is a really good question, and that's why I'm struggling with this partly, because I think it really matters to what this book does. And and partly the question you're getting at here is like, what is this book saying? Like in 2055, when a 15-year-old starts to read this book, how's it gonna shape that person's vision of like dating and romance and sex and all that? And I think that's a super important thing. What I'm going to say is, I wish we could conceive of a form of attraction and romance that didn't include this kind of risk of violence, that didn't include this sense of power difference, this sense of coercion,
and even dislike. I mean, the
Right.
more benign than violence, but still dislike and conflict
just
suck.
friction and conflict.
Yeah.
I wish we could kind of think of it without that.
Yeah.
I just don't know if our monkey brains allow it.
Yeah.
Like it may be that on some level we have to have that. I don't know.
Like a drama of something.
Like I'm being a little pessimistic. I think about like human bandwidth.
Yeah.
Maybe is what's going on here. But yeah, I know what you're saying, that it is such a fundamental conceit. What's the Bogart movie with, I think with Hepburn, where she slaps him, he slaps her back, she slaps him a second time, and then they start kissing.
Right.
And it feels like,
well, Indiana Jones.
Right.
Women slap him, and then he grabs them and kisses them.
Right.
And in the blonde, I know people don't like the second one, but the blonde tries to walk away, and he grabs her with the whip and pulls her back. And
and it's like,
and they've
suddenly,
hated each other the whole movie long.
Yeah.
And that makes people want them.
Right.
Like, what is it? I just wonder. Like,
so there.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think my understanding of this, and for what it's worth, like I'm not an expert.
Yeah.
Like I'm amazed some days that I just even get by on in this end of my life. But I get the feeling that, and I don't know, I'd be curious to see if this is your sense of it too. I get the feeling that one of the things people think is that tension was always about attraction. That they never really disliked each other. That tension was about a kind of attraction they didn't want to acknowledge, and thus this kind of repressed stuff made its way back to the surface in violence or insults or whatever kind of more benign kind of conflict, arguments, whatever, and what we're getting is this kind of Freudian resolution, in the sense of recognizing the repressed in order to remove its psychological power to be an obstacle to well-being, with that kind of like sudden feeling kiss.
I mean, all of which underwrites your sense that maybe that's how our monkey brains work. I mean, that was kind of Freud. I know Freud isn't legit as a psychologist, but he is legit as a literary critic. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's kind of his point, is that our monkey brains won't really allow, we will repress things and we will have to resolve them, and that's just like what we'll do.
Yeah, I think it's not a coincidence that one of the models for this that keep reappearing in our stories is one where like what the guy needs to do is just be like firmer and more arrogant and more violent until the woman decides she likes him.
Yeah.
And I think that's maybe an artifact of power structures in our society, more than whatever other stuff might be going on there. But I guess what I'm saying is if I'm understanding you right, you're asking, like, is this just an inevitable part of the story?
Well, just the idea of the rom-com as attendant to the idea that they start out not liking each other,
Right.
then they love each other. It's been a staple, again, going back
Fireworks,
to Shakespeare and
right,
before.
fireworks,
You know, is that something that speaks poorly of us, that we love it so much, or is it just like our nature, or is there? I mean, part of me wants to say there's an element of a redemption theme in this. The idea that maybe, you know, sometimes you're wrong in your opinions of people.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe sometimes, like, you know, the people that you don't like, if you got to know them a little better, you would realize that you do. And this is that's a different thing.
No, I think it's also, and maybe this is just about some other things that are on my mind right now. But as you know, I'm a huge fan of the Drive-By Truckers.
Yeah.
And there's a fantastic song in there. It's called "The World of Hurt" from an album, I don't know, 10 years ago. I think it was called February 14th, I think was the name of the album.
Mm.
And it's almost spoken word. It's just this sort of vampy, you know, high overdrive guitar, and I think Patterson Hood sort of just almost just talking. It might be Jason Isbell. I think it's Hood though. But at one point in the song, you know, the narrator says something like, if you think what you have has even the tiniest chance of working out, you just need to grab onto it with both hands and never let go.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing, maybe a other thing, you know, besides this very true stuff about the drama of it and all that, is I think this sense of how really uncommon a true lifelong love story is, that maybe we have to imagine it in this kind of like outrageous way.
Yeah.
Because it just seems so unlikely.
Yeah.
That, you know, that A, that you could find somebody, that B, that you could stand them, that they could stand you, that you actually came to like each other, that you're gonna like promise to live together forever.
And you'll have all this chemistry.
Right.
Like this novel, you know, unlike Sense and Sensibility, is giving the reader like that thing that rock singers mean when they say "I want it all."
Yeah.
Like Sense and Sensibility kind of said, well, look,
sure.
Marianne, we just have to assume she's going to be fine.
Right.
Eleanor and her husband, it's not like they're going to be breaking the bedpost anytime soon, but they're going to have a virtuous.
Mm-hmm.
Here, what we want is like they're young, they're good looking,
Right.
they're passionate, like we want it all. We want it to be real love and sexy,
Yeah.
and
Well,
we want the money to go in the right places, like
and
everything.
It's not a coincidence.
Yeah.
Right? That this all goes down in the backdrop of Charlotte's marriage to Collins.
That's right.
Which I don't even want to imagine that.
Right.
I mean, like there's that scene in Office Space.
Yeah.
Where what's his name is imagining his boss.
Yeah.
You know, cheating on her.
Right. If you could just, yeah.
And this is very much like Collins, like, how felicitous, my dear.
Well, he could even be probably talking about Lady Catherine.
Yeah. This is probably not as good as it would be if it were Lady Catherine.
Right. I hope she would approve of my technique.
But I'm sure you're trying your best.
Yes.
So Charlotte's life is not going to be this.
Yes.
And one of the signals for that is that there was never any friction.
Yeah.
They just worked it out.
Yeah.
And maybe we think you need that struggle to kind of like light the fire. I don't know.
Which, I mean, goes back to his opening line, right?
Yeah.
On 121, I mean, his opening line, for all its problems, and I'm glad you brought him up, but, you know, or wait, I guess I forgot what page the proposal was on.
It's 131.
131. Yeah, that opening sentence, "In vain have I struggled."
Yeah.
That is certainly not a way of expressing himself that Collins would come up with.
Right.
I mean, Collins' version of toxicity is very true, but it's in a different.
Right.
It's a different kind of you know. It's like, you're not going to get the quiet guy in the drawing room that won't speak, But you're also not going to get these like big gestures of life grabbing with both hands either.
Genuine gestures.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Well, and I think that having this all go down in the parsonage and at
Rosings.
Rosings, yeah. I think sort of sets a certain stage, right? And then of course the very last line of today's reading, right?
Pemberley.
To Pemberley, therefore they were
Well,
to go.
yeah, and it makes you wonder. That's a great way to end the volume because
Yeah.
it's so much of this novel is about property. I mean, it all started with this easement.
Yeah.
Is it called an easement?
Entailment. Yeah.
And the house that the Bennets can't keep, and now we're going to go to Pembroke, which is like the seedbed of all the wealth, right?
Well, I mean, it's still not as wealthy as
Lady Catherine.
Yeah.
But I'm under the impression that Darcy's going to get her money too.
Maybe so, right?
But
this is Darcy's stage.
Yes.
Right, and I think like the fanboys and fangirls in us are supposed to see this sentence after reading several pages of Elizabeth Bennet making her peace with the way things are.
Yeah.
Now she's based on this information that he's not going to be there. They're going to go to Pemberley.
Yeah.
And I think there's supposed to be this little person inside us, maybe with like braces and headgear, going squeak, because we know
he's going to be there.
He's going to be there,
or we hope he is anyway.
And he's going to be like washing his car with his shirt off.
Yeah.
And
while reading to blind kids.
Right. and everything's gonna just turn, and all those things that she had made her peace with are just gonna like the bottom's gonna fall out, and she's just gonna be like this.
Yeah. So and I appreciate, and I mean I know that we'll also get a chance in 2 weeks. To perhaps take some time to read some of the paratext. This too is a Norton edition. It includes several letters from Jane Austen to other people, which I'll probably take the time to read, and then extracts from criticism.
Because the next volume, I think, is not extraordinarily long. Was it 166? 266 exactly.
It's 100 pages.
100 pages.
But we have 2 weeks to do it.
And if we are at all diligent, we'll have some time to get into the other stuff a little and maybe see what that points to. But I mean, as you pointed out, I mean, we know basically. I'm sure there are details I've forgotten, but we know.
I mean, I still don't know what happens with Jane and Bingley. I can't remember.
We know the arc.
Yeah.
But I am kind of curious to see how some of the finer pieces fit into the puzzle, and I'm honestly curious to see when I read this before. I remember thinking that it was just an unalloyed good.
Yeah.
That they got together.
Yeah.
And I'm curious to see 20 years later if it feels the same way to me. More than that.
Yeah, I doubt anything's going to feel unalloyed. Yeah. Like you said, we're older and married now.
Yeah.
But the best we can do is I hope we'll walk away with some sense of, it's a good thing that this book is such an influencer still. Like, hopefully we'll be able to say that at least.
I'm fascinated by the questions that it brings up about, I mean, in not even 300 pages, there are some very real, very hard questions about class, about gender, about social pressure, about how to live your life in this really. I mean,
well, and even about parenting. Really, if you think about it,
I mean, if this had come out of what year did we say this was?
It's 1813.
Yeah.
The first edition of the novel, 1813.
If this had come out of, New York,
yeah,
I mean, it would be in contention in my mind for like the great American novel.
Yeah.
I mean, there's nothing in Moby Dick. There's nothing in Huck Finn. There's nothing in On the Road or Catcher in the Rye or Sun Also Rises that this book doesn't tackle somehow.
Yeah.
So I'm impressed. I'm a little more troubled by the relationship than I was when I was younger. I hope that means good things about me.
Yeah.
But I'm also just super impressed with
it's
the
also
layers
possible that Austen herself, and I mean I know values change, but I wonder if we could like have a seance and bring her ghost in here if she wouldn't say, well, yeah, like about some of the toxicity you're mentioning.
Want him grabbing me when I was leaving the room.
Yeah, like I don't know that any of this. I mean, I think that you made an interesting point when you said, I think this is a book filled with characters that are doing the best they can, with the possible exception of Wickham. You could even argue that Collins is just like, he's a piece of shit, but he's trying to hang on to just his little piece of the earth. But Austen, too, maybe would make that same appeal and say, I'm trying to build this world, I'm trying to be critical, I'm trying to imagine love, but like, damn, yeah, it's rough out there. Yeah, so,
Exactly.
yes.
All right, so
Good.
Two more weeks.
2 more
and then
weeks.
we wrap it up.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Yeah.